Yeah, as workplace chaplains, we have found that difficulty in life really is no respecter of persons. It doesn't matter where somebody lives or what their last name is or how much money they make. The question is, when stuff happens in life, and it's not a matter of if, but when it happened to any of us, the key question is, do we have resources in place that can provide assistance in times of difficulty? We have been told from company leaders have been reduced. So company turnover, reduced healthcare costs, increased performance, and ultimately improved bottom line because you are helping to stabilize the employee base. So there is one industry that has had an outsized role in shaping the entire workplace chaplaincy industry, corporate chaplaincy, and that's actually the poultry industry.
Yeah.
Our largest company that I referred to, with about 30,000 employees under Marketplace, that's in the poultry industry. Largest company under Capital Chaplains by far was in the poultry industry.
Well, I am so delighted to have a long-term friend with me today, Steve Cook. Steve, we've known each other for several decades. I don't know the exact year.
Least.
Yeah, but you're one of my,
I think,
yeah, 25 years. Wow, you're one of my longest-term Madison-based friends. We both live in Middleton, which is a town that abuts Madison. And we've worked together previously at InterVarsity Christian Fellowship and stayed friends over many years. Steve is the director of regional operations for Marketplace Chaplains. And I am so excited to have a conversation with you, Steve, about chaplaincy, corporate chaplaincy. I know so many have heard about chaplaincy. I think when we think about chaplaincy, we often think about hospital chaplaincy. Maybe that's the first thing that comes to mind. But the field is so much more diverse. And you've been in this corporate chaplaincy field for a long time, and I'm just excited to have this conversation with you.
It's great to be here, John. Thank you for having me.
Well, Steve, let's explore your vocational journey. How did you get interested in corporate chaplaincy? What led you to the role that you play now?
Yeah, great question, John. And actually, before we go there, I just want to give a quick shout out to you, to Stephen Laurel Brown, the foundation, Upper House staff, for just an amazing work that you all are doing. It is nothing short of miraculous to see what has transpired in the Madison area through the Upper House and through the Stephen Laurel Brown Foundation. I mean, I distinctly remember, 7, 8 years ago? I mean, I can't believe that they hired you back to Madison and that you accepted and you came. And then you are one of the hardest working people I know. You know, your family wasn't with you. And I think you worked night and day for those first 6, 7, 8 weeks, getting the Upper House, literally helping with the build out, working with the board and the Browns on programming, all of that. And that it is just amazing to see what has transpired. So thank you for all of your hard work. Thank you for your faithfulness. And again, everybody involved in the foundation and the Upper House, it's been great to see.
Joy. And I remember in those early days where I was living in the building and there were contractors in trying to finish out the space. And Steve was kind enough to do an extraction. I remember he said, okay, I'm coming. I'm going to be there at 11:30 and we're going to go to lunch. We're leaving the site. I don't know if you have a way to lock the doors, but we're going to leave anyways. And I'm going to take you out for 2 hours and you just need a break. And that was such a gift of friendship. And I really, really appreciate it. I tell that story all the time. It was really one of the kindest things anybody could do because it really was in those early days, almost 24/7. And actually, Steve, this is such an important conversation around corporate chaplaincy because we're in a programming calendar where we're exploring the theme here at Upper House of what does it mean to be a good neighbor. And we're going to get there, and I'm going to ask you to reflect on this a little bit, but the whole idea of corporate chaplaincy to me seems like one of the really tangible ways that we can express neighborliness in the workplace. So I want you to hold that thought, but for a while until we get there. But thank you for being a good friend and a good neighbor and extracting me for a while, doing an intervention and getting me out in those early days when we were just working around the clock.
Absolutely, John.
So, Steve, back to your vocational journey.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about your journey into corporate chaplaincy.
You bet. So, as I think about the last really 40 years, I think of it in two halves. The first sort of 20 to 25 years or so were various pieces of the puzzle that were essentially preparation for the second 20 years, and that is the preparation for workplace chaplaincy. So those initial pieces of the puzzle include an undergraduate degree in business administration and management from Indiana University, attending seminary and taking graduate courses at Regent College, in the Marketplace ministry concentration. Of course, Regent is in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. Then a key piece to the preparation for workplace chaplaincy, I believe, was serving for 15 years with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, the National Service Center in Madison, Wisconsin. This, of course, included a time of extensive team building and leadership development, theological training, as well as a partnership with InterVarsity's, what was called at the time Marketplace Ministries. You'll remember, of course, under the leadership of Pete Hammond, who was a close mentor to you as well. Those were formative years, so many opportunities for training and equipping. Then on the caregiving side, I was privileged to serve for 10 years as executive pastor of High Point Church, located in Madison. It's a larger evangelical church. And there, the training and equipping continued, specifically in the area of what it means to be a pastor. So a lot of those skills and abilities are transferable into workplace chaplaincy, but there are differences, and I'll mention that, I think, a little bit later. Yeah. So all of that then, by way of preparation, allowed me to have a sort of a ringside seat into what was happening in the broader workplace chaplaincy movement, if you will. And I noticed this sort of sub-movement called workplace or corporate chaplaincy. And that sort of got my attention. And I believe through God's leading, he helped me establish a company. I set it up as a limited liability corporation, and I called it Capital Chaplains. This was in the year 2005. So Capital Chaplains was this region, that's the south central portion of Wisconsin, the first workplace chaplaincy initiative, and had the privilege of running that for about 15 years. And then I'll tell you what that morphed into. So that was the first official sort of launch into workplace chaplaincy, was the starting of Capital Chaplains, and was privileged to serve a number of companies over those 15 years, was able to go full-time myself after about 2 or 3 years of launching it, and then was also able to subcontract then and hire at any given time 7 or 8 chaplains to help with the service delivery and with the ministry opportunities. Almost immediately after I launched Capital Chaplains, I started getting calls from people around the country saying, well, are you going to bring Capital Chaplains to our town or our state? And the vision was always to be very relevant in our part of the country, not to become national under Capital Chaplains. So I would spend quite a bit of time with these folks. I would send them, back office documents and resources, etc. So finally in 2010, decided to sort of get a little bit more organized and formed Corporate Chaplaincy Consulting. It wasn't a separate legal entity. It was under Capital Chaplains, but through that initiative, Corporate Chaplaincy Consulting, I was able to come alongside and was privileged to serve about 100 paid clients around the country for about 7 or 8 years, until I decided to put that initiative on mothballs, at least for a while. So then, because workplace chaplaincy is still a relatively new area of service and of ministry, there's no association that serves the various agencies around the country. In 2015, I set up a nonprofit corporation called the Workplace Chaplaincy Foundation, Inc. And this foundation's core purpose is to raise money to help resource and undergird the larger workplace chaplaincy or corporate chaplaincy movement.
Right.
So this foundation, it's still running, still small. It's a volunteer effort on the part of myself and the other board members, but we encourage other agencies to get together. We do training, equipping, we do some research. things like that that serve the broader movement.
Yeah, and you've even Steve, you've even taken some of that training overseas, right? As I recall.
Correct.
Foundation. Yeah.
Yep. There's some of that. And then also through the consulting as well, was privileged to work with some partners outside the United States, which was a great privilege. Yeah. And then just one more sort of initiative that'll bring us to the present day, John, and that is that in about 2017, I was privileged to work with a group of other chaplaincy agency leaders to form just an informal fellowship group. It's not incorporated, it's not organized. It's an informal fellowship group called the Chaplain Leaders Group. And it's a fellowship of workplace chaplaincy leaders from around the country. And we get together twice a year, once in person, once virtually, just to encourage one another, share best practices, that kind of thing. So then, getting back to the story of Capital Chaplain, about 4 or 5 years ago, about half of our clients had plants or offices outside of our service territory. So I had to solve the staffing challenge if we were to continue to serve those good companies. So I engaged the then CEO and president of Marketplace Chaplains, which is a nationwide workplace chaplaincy provider. It's a gentleman by the name of Doug Fagerstrom. And my question to him was, would he be willing to share staff in other parts of the country, which is kind of an unusual request, given that we were essentially direct competitors. Right. But because of the nature of the work that we're in and the caliber of Doug and the other agency leaders, he said, sure, we can talk about sharing staff. However, it became very evident early on in the conversation that the best thing to do was simply to merge Capital Chaplains into Marketplace, which is what we did.
Yeah.
And I became executive director of operations for Wisconsin, the northeastern part of Iowa, and more recently, northern Illinois. So chaplains came across, companies came across, and then I assumed a full-time paid position with Marketplace Chaplains. So within that entity, now Marketplace, I should say in our division, our area, have the privilege of overseeing about 70 chaplains, serving about 120 locations. And then nationwide, we're serving about 1,500 companies, from small, mom and pop shops to large secular companies. In fact, our largest client company has just under 30,000 employees that we're privileged to serve. And then we serve client companies in all 50 states with about 2,000 chaplains. And all the chaplains, by the way, are paid, and they don't have to raise money for their remuneration. So as you can see, John, I'm very focused and dedicated to serving in sort of the workplace chaplaincy space. I believe we're not only providing a great service, but it's a privilege to have a small part in an internal impact in somebody's life on a daily basis. So these are just a few of the pieces that have guided me over the last 40-some years, John, into workplace chaplaincy.
Yeah, thank you so much for that background and just the unique path of your equipping, from working on a theology of work and marketplace ministry to being an executive pastor to studying business. I can just see how all these pieces really do come together to really help you not only serve corporate chaplaincy, but to be an advocate more broadly for the movement. And I know the movement's really grown significantly over the last couple of decades. I think our listeners would be really helped to know what a corporate chaplain does. Again, we probably imagine certain things, but could you walk us through, I don't know, a typical week or month? And maybe it varies from place to place, but to the extent that there are some rhythms and patterns of corporate chaplaincy, what do they look like?
Yeah, as workplace chaplains, we have found that difficulty in life really is no respecter of persons. It doesn't matter where somebody lives or what their last name is or how much money they make. The question is, when stuff happens in life, and it's not a matter of if, but when it happened to any of us, the key question is, do we have resources in place that can provide assistance in times of difficulty? So let me address the question by first talking about our operating values, because that informs our practice. So couple key values that guide our work and guide the practice of workplace chaplaincy. We offer what we call the employee care service. That's sort of the umbrella term that we are known to provide. First sort of operating value is that it's voluntary and it's permission-based. So employees can take advantage of a chaplain service or the employee care service or not. We will not force a relationship on an employee. We wait to be invited in. Right along with that is that our conversations have to be confidential. So whatever it is that employees talk to us about as workplace chaplains, it's confidential. Trust, as you can imagine, is very, very key. And that's something that we guard very carefully. A modest per employee per month fee is paid by the company. So it's a free benefit to the employees. Another aspect of it is that it's independent of company operations. So why is that important? So clearly we become part of the fabric of a local community, a location or a local company, but the content of what we talk about remains confidential. So we report in general trends, the kinds of conversations we're having with team members or employees, but we don't talk about specific individuals, of course. And then our benefit is available to all employees, their family members, their households, whoever lives with them, it's covered. So yeah, the kinds of topics that we cover. And again, it's whatever the employees want to talk about, whatever's on their mind. So it's things like, stress management, mental wellness, relationship issues. So marriage, parenting, aging parents, that kind of thing. Health matters, finances, a lot of discussion on addictions, wide variety. Sometimes we get involved with employees on workplace issues. Somebody values their job, but they hate their boss. And our job is simply to come alongside them and to help them think through creative, positive ways of dealing with that. So hopefully, does that give you just a bit of the kinds of discussions we have, John?
Yeah. What about the rounds? I
Sure.
wonder how the businesses are really different. You have service companies to probably. I imagine the variety of industries you serve are really significant. Manufacturing, service, maybe more. You can tell me, kind of what the industries are, but what do the rounds look like? Like, how do you visit employees? How do you make yourself available? What does that look like on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis?
Yeah, good question, John. So we become part of the fabric of the community. Part of what we do that's very important to us is that our service is very personal in nature. So yes, we have 24/7 availability. People can reach out to us, through electronic means. But the main way we deliver our services is on site, in person, and even to accentuate that even more, some places give us an office where we can have a private conversation. But I encourage our chaplains, don't hang out and hide out in an office. Be out where the employees are. So we ask permission for chaplains to be able to wander the floor, wander the plant, the assembly line, whatever it is, the office suites, on a regular basis. So typically it's a weekly basis, and they make contact with employees. If there's something there that the employee wants to talk to the chaplain about, they can on site, or they can set up an appointment or talk during a break or after hours. So it's very relational. It's based on site rounds. As I said, we become part of the fabric of the community. I do encourage chaplains that it takes time to build that trust and to build those relationships. So it might be 6 months before you see real traction, with a good share of the people, because it's relatively new. But once people see the model and see the benefits of it, they become raving fans of the services that we're providing. So in terms of what it looks like, we may make suggestions or help employees connect with other resources. So we may make referrals to a specialist, but we won't tell employees what to do. You're more likely to ask questions to help employees think through whatever is going on.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. So, would you even be available during a third shift?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
We try and serve. Not try. We do serve all the employees, wherever they are. And one other aspect of this, of course, we're chaplains, so we're people of faith. We're very happy to talk about issues of faith, but it is always at the employee's initiative. So what that looks like on a regular basis, I estimate that about 90% of the chaplain care that we provide is something that I call just simply generic human care. We show up, okay? The other 10% approximately tends to focus on matters of faith, and these are more typically than not very significant conversations. So that gives you sort of a sense of the kinds of conversations that we're having and the environment that we're working.
Yeah. I know one of the values, I want to move on to the economics of this because I know there's a strong business case, but before we go there, I'd like to just circle back to what I believe is one of your values, and that is to, as you've stated, to respond, but at the invitation or the request of the employee to explore matters of faith. What happens if somebody comes from a different faith tradition? How do you interact with employees from other traditions?
Yeah, very insightful question, John. So as trained chaplains, professional chaplains, we serve all employees regardless of faith or no faith. Okay? So that means our task is to serve everybody. We can affirm, and we do affirm, our faith. So we are Christian chaplains. Okay? If an employee essentially is looking for, I'm going to refer back to that other term that I just used, that phrase, generic human care, we can respond, and we can listen, and we can provide help as is appropriate. If it is a matter of faith, and they are not of the Christian faith, then our job as chaplains is to find somebody who can help them, and obviously in that faith matter, and continue to build the relationship with them.
Yeah.
So it is not to try and talk them out of their faith if it's different than ours. It's very much a listening, serving posture while being authentic to our own faith, tradition, and convictions.
It is very helpful. So this is not corporate chaplaincy is not about evangelism or conversion. It's about generic care and responding when invited, pastoral care that is rooted in the Christian faith tradition, which you clearly come out of. But if someone is not of that tradition, finding a clergy person or person of faith leadership that can assist them in their particular faith and tradition needs. Is that a good statement?
Absolutely. You got it. Yeah.
Well, what about the business case for corporate chaplaincy? I know the industry has grown significantly, and maybe you could speak to that. But when you're out trying to market your services, what do you communicate? Why does it make sense for a business to consider corporate chaplaincy as a really viable option to care for employees?
Yeah, a number of responses, John, to that question. And I'm just going to sort of tick off a few. These are things that some of our client company leaders have said to us, this is why I believe in what you're doing, and this is why I'm paying money. In some cases, actually, the owners are paying for this service out of their own pocket. In other cases, it's paid for by through the operations of the company. But it's things like this. So an employee care service will allow leaders to lead the company while simultaneously demonstrating appropriate and tangible employee care. So let's face it, as a company grows, the leader cannot remain in a personal, deep relationship with all the employees. And in many cases, that may not be appropriate to blur that line between a company leader who has to make those business decisions and lead the employees. It doesn't mean that leader does not care. They can continue to provide care, such as providing chaplains, but it allows leaders to lead while simultaneously implementing a high value of care for employees. Right along with that, an employee care service demonstrates that all employees are valued. Morale, we are told and we have seen, will improve as a result of implementing this service. In fact, on Monday of this week, just a couple days ago, I was in 8 o'clock in the morning, freezing cold. I think it was minus 10 actual degrees.
Yeah.
I was in Sussex, Wisconsin, which is just above Waukesha. And we were launching our services at the Monday morning team meeting. This is so unusual. I mean, you get the picture. It's Monday morning. It's freezing cold outside. Many people would prefer not to be at work, but the morale was, because they care about their company culture and the morale of their team members was already high. And to that, they are now adding 2 very good chaplains. So it's those kinds of companies where leaders recognize the importance of morale, and having a chaplain service is one of those things. Here's another set of very important reasons why leaders bring us in. An employee care service establishes a resource before a crisis occurs, not after. We'll show up and do crisis care. Yes, there's an accident or an incident or something. We'll show up and we'll do that. But we would much rather have this service in place before a crisis occurs. Related to this, our service is proactive rather than reactive, okay? And it's personal. So those things are extremely important. There was one leader that said, this was a company with about 500 employees in the Southeast. It's kind of like a Jiffy Lube, a quick lube place.
Right.
And he described it as an EAP, or Employee Assistance Program,
Yes,
on steroids. And what he meant by that was the Employee Assistance Program, which tends to not be proactive, tends not to be personal. It's just the 800 number or the website. He said it's so much more effective. In fact, his company stats showed that once they implemented the employee care service, upwards of 60% of the employees took advantage of the employee care service, as opposed to a good EAP, which is 4 to 6. And again, the difference can be traced directly back to being proactive and personal.
So an EAP program would be 4 to 6% would access it. Is that?
For an EAP, an employee assistance program, would be 4 to 6, and that's very good response rate.
And that's percent of the employees, 4 to 6%.
Right, 4 to 6% of the employees in a given year.
Right.
For an employee care service that we provide with chaplains, that jumps to north of 60%.
That's amazing.
And again, it's a significant difference, again, because it's proactive and personal.
Yeah. So the downstream costs, I can imagine, the downstream costs would involve things like health insurance, absenteeism, turnover, medical insurance, those kinds. I'm assuming that an employee care program, corporate chaplaincy, really helps to not completely eliminate, but to soften some of those really heavy downstream costs that might be in place if you didn't have that program in place. Is that correct?
Absolutely. All those things you mentioned, we have been told from company leaders have been reduced. So company turnover, reduced healthcare costs, increased performance, and ultimately improved bottom line, because you are helping to stabilize the employee base. So that company that I mentioned that was in the fast lube deal, they had before implementing the chaplain benefit, they had almost 100% turnover in their workforce every year, okay? And which is a concern, obviously, to the owner. And they had high shrinkage. And first, when I heard this story, what's there to steal from a quick lube, fast lube place? Well, it's free oil changes for family and friends is what it is. Both of those numbers drastically came down, the turnover and the shrinkage. And the owner himself says the leading cause for those things to improve, those indicators, was because we started having chaplains on site. Isn't that interesting?
Yes. If I'm an owner, like, how expensive is it? Like, again, you don't have to give me an exact price tag, but if somebody, is it price? Do you sort of price this out per employee? How do you actually price your services? How does it work?
Yeah. Good question. Again, we are paid for the services that we provide. So this is not a volunteer. There's some other chaplaincy initiatives that are volunteer based. This is not.
Right.
We feel that it's appropriate to ask for remuneration for our services.
Yes.
It's typically a per month per employee fee, and it's ridiculously modest.
Yeah.
I'll say that, John.
Yep.
If somebody goes to their favorite coffee shop and orders a fancy foo-foo drink, and maybe a modest scone or something, you've covered it per employee per month. So and if you consider, and this is just my personal conviction, I think a strong case could be made for asking considerably more. But here's why. We are not only dealing with the company's number one resource, their people, but in many cases, their very well-being.
Yes.
Okay. What could be more valuable than that?
Right.
That's just the reality. It's very reasonable, and we've got business development folks that are happy to have those conversations.
That's amazing. So it's really helpful. Everybody can sort of add up specialty coffee and a scone,
right?
And put a price tag to that, and then think about the value of your employees and really caring for them in
absolutely
all of their needs. How do you find your chaplains? I think you noted how many chaplains do you supervise across the region?
So about 70. And a lot of it is referrals. We look for people with transferable skills. So chaplains from other areas, so military, hospital, hospice, social workers, pastors. We do quite a bit of internal training initially and then ongoing continuing education. You cannot assume, for example, that a local pastor will make a good chaplain because they have to retool. When they're in their church and somebody comes to them, it's expected that they will be very open to talk about their beliefs, et cetera, et cetera. Chaplaincy, particularly workplace chaplaincy, we are guests. And so we need to behave like that. It's not a platform for anything, for us to say anything we want to. We're there to listen and to ask questions and to be helpful. So some people in other areas, disciplines, that's a bit of a change in paradigm, change in their thinking.
Do staff need to have formal theological training?
That certainly helps. It's not a requirement. And again, we factor in a number of different things, including formal education. But we also look for people that have had real world, so to speak, marketplace experience. So they know what that world is like, and they can function well in that environment.
Right. So we've talked about the benefits, and they seem countless. I'm going to ask you to put on your critical thinking hat and to spell out the downsides. What is the negative case, if you can make one, for corporate chaplaincy?
And actually, it relates to just what we talked about. When there isn't sufficient training or understanding, like the difference between being a pastor and being a chaplain, then we can sometimes get into some potentially troubled waters. So, for example, if a chaplain breaks the trust of an employee or potentially breaks confidentiality, that can spell trouble very quickly. I mean, I've had, situations happen. It doesn't happen often, thankfully, but every once in a while, a chaplain will do or say something that gets the attention of somebody up the organizational chart, and they will call and say, what's going on? Okay. And it invariably comes back to there wasn't sufficient training or sufficient understanding of that chaplain's role. So not upholding trust, not breaking that, maintaining confidentiality is extremely important. We're very closely related to that is this idea of permission. For example, we serve some pretty large, what could be described as secular companies. In some cases, we're known as care partners in those companies as opposed to chaplain. That was determined by the company leadership to be more acceptable than the term chaplain. We leave it up to client company leadership to make that choice. But every once in a while, a chaplain will not adhere to that permission principle like they should. Now we're talking fine tuning in the rare exception, but chaplains are humans, and human too, and sometimes they forget their training, and if they don't adhere to that permission principle, sometimes we'll hear about that. So again, it's in any community, typically there will be a few people that they're not sure about this chaplain thing, or maybe they've had church hurt in their background, or whatever the case might be. And whatever they think of us or the chaplain benefit, it isn't positive. And we give them wide space. We don't force we respect them, we honor them, we'll greet them, but we won't initiate conversation with them. And In most of those cases, once the chaplain has been around for a while, and it might be a year, 6 months, 9 months, a year, something happens in the employee's life and they open up and they have a wonderful relationship with the chaplain. So, there are a few people that...
Steve, I meant to explore some of the industries, because I imagine, the workplace is so varied. There's manufacturing, financial services, hospitality. I mean, just think about all the industries and kinds of businesses that are out there. Can you give a sense of the range of the kinds of businesses that you serve? Is there kind of an ideal client? Maybe there isn't. Maybe everybody's a potential client.
Yeah.
Organization that you could serve. And then how do the services vary? So if you're working with on a manufacturing plant floor, how would the chaplaincy work look different than if you're working in, for example, a retail establishment?
Sure. Or maybe the executive suite.
Yeah.
As I think about this, I think I would respond by saying that our services, the chaplain services, is probably dictated more by economic issues, so economic status, rather than industry type. So, for example, those in lower economic status or wage, salary range tend to not have as many resources available to them than those in higher income brackets. So, for example, let's just say an employee is having a difficult, marriage situation, and the chaplain meets with them and determines that they could really benefit by, say, good marriage counseling. Well, that could take maybe 6, 7 visits, maybe $100 a visit. That's $600 or $700. Somebody in a more modest income bracket, they probably can't swing that. So we do see those in lower economic situations take advantage of our services more often, simply because we're available and it's paid for, and we're happy to do that. However, it does not mean that higher income people don't have as many issues. They absolutely do. And they may be more covered and more masked, okay, but they are there and they are just as significant. It potentially is just not out there. It's a little bit more hidden. How we provide the chaplain service may differ. So if it's an environment where we can interact with employees and not disturb their workflow, or certainly not create a safety issue, then that's awesome. Obviously, many workplaces are like that, when employees can see the chaplain walking around, and you just give a wave of the hand or a nod. An employee might say to the chaplain, could you stop back during the break? There's something I want to talk with you about. And the chaplain's happy to do that. As you go up, higher up in the organization, it'll probably be more appointment-based, just for a number of reasons, as opposed to, walking around. And there tends to be more a greater desire to keep the conversations with the chaplain more confidential, not just in terms of content, but in terms of meeting with the chaplains. Regardless of where the employee serves in a company, we say, if you don't want to visit with the chaplain on site, that's fine. If you've got something you want to talk about, we'll be happy to meet you off site. So it could be their home, could be over coffee, something like that.
Yeah.
It's interesting you asked about industries. So there is one industry that has had an outsized role in shaping the entire workplace chaplaincy industry, corporate chaplaincy, and that's actually the poultry industry.
Yeah.
Our largest company that I referred to, with about 30,000 employees under Marketplace, that's in the poultry industry. Largest company under Capital Chaplains by far was in the poultry industry. Tyson Foods, the giant in the poultry industry with 110,000 team members. John Tyson, about 25 years ago, started an in-house chaplaincy benefit. Now, just as a sidebar, I think a strong case could be made. It's better to outsource that than to do it in-house, but they decided to do it in-house, and last I heard, they had 120 some chaplains on the payroll.
Wow.
Okay. Well, I think that's an indication. They serve everybody throughout the organization, but that gives you an idea of one industry where there are lots of people. A lot of people in the lower income categories that really appreciate all the help that they can get.
So I'm assuming that is the poultry, mostly Tyson is the model for that. Tyson with their in-house.
Well, they're not the only one. They're the only poultry company that I know. There could be others that have in-house chaplains. Everybody else is contracted with companies like Marketplace Chaplains.
Yeah, but you mentioned the poultry industry being a heavy user of corporate chaplaincy. Are there other reasons for why that's the case? Is there some inherent risk or some reason that corporate chaplaincy has really taken root in that industry? Or by extension, does it come from some of these leading organizations like Tyson that started these programs a long time ago and others started to pay attention and followed suit?
Yeah. So it's interesting to follow the trends. I think that it comes back to the business reasons for doing it, that if they can reduce turnover, this is true for any industry, but particularly in the poultry industry, if they can reduce turnover, right, if they can stabilize the employee base. One concept we didn't talk about, John, that I think is important, I'll mention it now, isn't just absenteeism, but it's this idea of presenteeism. That's when somebody, I think we're probably all guilty of this if we're honest, we show up to work physically, but mentally and emotionally, we're someplace else dealing with something. Okay. So that's a big issue. That's where chaplains can really come in and help that employee deal with whatever it is that's causing them to be away emotionally and then get back to their work, be able to focus on their work. So I think for all those reasons, I think many, coming back to your question, many of the owners and senior leaders within the poultry industry happen to be people of strong faith, and it's out of that commitment to doing everything they can to help their employees, their team members. That's part of their conviction in their decision making. Does that make sense?
It's helpful. Yeah, it's really helpful. I want to turn to this idea of neighborliness. And you started to hint at this, that corporate chaplaincy is a way to act justly in the world. And the way I think you communicated this is that corporate chaplaincy often provides or fills in with services that might not be available to employees that have lower economic means. And it offers these things that might be, more readily available to those with more financial. As you've thought about this idea of neighborliness, particularly Jesus's command to love our neighbor, how does corporate chaplaincy achieve that end?
Oh, very good question, John. And we could spend a lot of time on this, but trying to narrow it down. So as we think about the story of the Good Samaritan in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10, the idea of neighborliness, just as you set it up, I am reminded actually of a formative story. It's a very Good Samaritan-like story that helped launch the entire field of workplace chaplaincy. So let me just give you a thumbnail of it. And if listeners want to dig into it more, the word chaplain actually originated from a literal Good Samaritan story that occurred about 337 AD. A young man of about 20 years of age by the name of Martin of Tours, okay, and who was a serious follower of Jesus, okay, history tells us, he was forced to serve in the Roman army because his dad was also served in the army, and in that setup, sons automatically had to serve, okay? So he wanted to go into sort of vocational ministry, church-based work, but he had to serve in the army, okay? While in Amiens, France, Martin noticed, as this true story goes, a poor man at the city gate without much clothing to wear, and it was bitterly cold, just like what we're experiencing probably. So very cold. He was a beggar. He did not have warm clothes to wear. Martin drew his sword and cut his military cloak, the story goes, in half and gave half to the shivering beggar. This cut off part of Martin's cape became then a sacred church relic. And used in ceremonies. They used it when the Roman army went into battle. Okay, from this application of Martin's cape, we derived the word capella, or chapel, or chaplain. And so, I think about this literal, neighbor. What can we learn from this being a good neighbor story, this Good Samaritan story? Well, there's much more to the story, John. We can't take time now to go into it, but St. Martin of Tours, not a modern day good neighbor, but certainly somebody who is an example for us. So back to your question, John, about how chaplaincy relates to neighborliness. Just like St. Martin of Tours was a Good Samaritan in the 4th century, okay, so we as chaplains are called to model neighborliness to those with whom we come into contact. And I would add, I believe all followers of Jesus, not just professional chaplains, are called to the same kind of Good Samaritan type of action. I believe that the workplace is an ideal venue for us as modern Christ followers to be neighborly or to be Good Samaritans. I mean, think about it. Opportunities abound to provide help and hope to fellow employees. And John, as we track sort of the marketplace movement and what that means, we've come to understand, right, that the marketplace, the workplace, is where most people spend the majority of their time. It used to be perhaps neighborhoods or houses of faith or even families, not so much nowadays. It's the workplace. And so maybe it's in this sphere that we as modern followers of Jesus can be salt and light. So, John, I think you're really onto something to press into this idea of how can we be neighborly in the Good Samaritan understanding of that word. And again, it's not just for professional types. It's for all of us to follow.
I mean, if you sort of divide your day in thirds, let's say you sleep 8 hours, you're at home 8 hours and you work 8 hours, right? Where you, at least a third of your life generally is spent in the workplace for those who have an opportunity to work or choose to work outside of the home. And it's just significant hours, right? Just that we spend with colleagues. And by extension, we can think about our work in our broader civic and communities as well. So the potential to be neighborly in these contexts is just extraordinary, is really immense. Steve, I wonder if you could walk us through a couple of stories about just the power of chaplaincy, like maybe just some transformational stories you've seen in the lives of others. And I don't know what those stories are, but I imagine you get a window into some really amazing healing, people who might not otherwise step into a church, but really benefit from care and even spiritual care. What might you share with us today that illustrates, the potential of corporate chaplaincy?
Sure. And John, it's interesting that you use that term transformation, because at the very highest level, that's what we are about as chaplains. Yes, it's about providing assistance with whatever the issue is at hand, and we do that a lot. It's providing hope, and particularly nowadays, I mean, we've seen, especially since the pandemic, a significant increase in suicide attempts and, unfortunately, suicides that have been completed. I mean, we used to see that maybe once every number of years. Now we're seeing it multiple times a year, throughout various industries. And so it's huge, that idea of being able to come alongside employees and provide a word of hope and hold their hope for them if the employee is not able to, if they are that hopeless. Okay. So just a couple stories. In fact, here are 6 or 7 things that I think we all can think about. And I want to encourage us all to think about and maybe incorporate not just chaplain types, but anybody that wants to be a good neighbor, be a good Samaritan, particularly in the workplace setting. As Christ followers, we know that we are called to be in prayer. And so we cannot enter the workplace without that attitude of prayer. We simply need to be available. Part of this is just being willing to be available. A third area is do some life together. Just hang out, get to know each other. Another one is be patient and be faithful. It takes time, sometimes weeks, sometimes months, sometimes even longer. We talked about permission. Okay. And again, this is something that we all can incorporate into how we relate to others. Wait to be invited in. Okay. Don't be pushy. Wait to be invited in. And then as spiritual people, we understand the importance of relying on the Holy Spirit and then just watch God at work. We just have to be faithful, but it's God's job to change people, to transform lives, and to transform organizations. Okay, so what does this look like in a couple stories, John? There's a company in town. In fact, this is really historic. This was the first company in South Central Wisconsin to initiate workplace chaplains. And it's none other than Pelletary Waste System, the company that hauls our trash. Okay. And I've been given permission to share this story both by family members and by the company. In fact, both those stories. This was a number of years ago. And the best time that I discovered to serve this company to be on site was between 5:30 in the morning and about 9 or 9:30 on a Tuesday. So I could pretty much touch bases. At the time, they had about 80 employees. I could touch bases with pretty much everybody in that time period. So I remember there was this one particular gentleman, I'll call him Tom, and he was a pretty rough character. When I say that Tom grew up in the steel mill community in Gary, Indiana, and he was an abusive man, whatever comes to your mind, Tom was guilty of. Okay, and I'm serious about that. He sort of looked like, remember Popeye, the cartoon character Popeye? He kind of came across like that. Okay, gruff, kind of looked like Popeye. Okay, so whatever he thought of me or the chaplain benefit was not positive. Okay, I could tell that. So 5:30 in the morning, I would greet him as cheerily as I could. I'd say, "Good morning, Tom," and I'd get a grunt back as he brushed by. Okay, so clearly he had not invited me in. About 6 months into, so this went on for about 6 months. He ended up in the hospital. He had abused his body, and I called him up. I said, "Tom, sorry to hear you're in the hospital. Would you like me to stop by and visit with you?" "Yeah, that'd be all right." So I stopped by, and honestly, John, this has got to be about the most superficial chaplaincy visit to a hospital, person in the hospital on record. The most significant thing we talked about was the hospital food, and that was it. Okay? Didn't offer to pray with him, none of that. Because again, he hadn't invited me in to do that. So next week is the company picnic. Because he has some health issues, I know he's taking retirement. So I take that opportunity to saddle up next to him on the picnic bench, and over burgers and chips, I hear his life story. Okay. And he kind of opens up, and we make that connection. He takes retirement. Okay. So back to the principles. Remember, we're doing some life together. We're being patient, being available, waiting to be invited in. Okay. So a year later, he's in retirement. A year later, his second wife calls me and says, just want you to know Tom's not expected to live more than a couple of weeks. And I said, "Sorry to hear that. Would you like me to stop by and just pay a visit?" And they live in a double wide trailer. And she said, that would be wonderful. Could I bring the HR director? And no, that would be fine. So he reluctantly, he'd never done anything like this before. He joins me. And remember, in family like this, there's a lot of conflict, a lot of disruption, a lot of dysfunction. It's very unusual to have the first family and the first spouse present along with the second family and the second spouse in the same space. So we talk for a little bit, and Tom says to me, now again, this is a man who has never, ever, ever darkened the doorway of a church in his life. Okay. He says almost right away to me, skip the small talk and how he's doing and all that. He says, "Chaplain," he said, "this is Tom speaking." He said, "I want you to know that I believe God, the God of heaven, has spoken to me, and that he has forgiven me of all the wrongs that I have done to people." Now, I knew Tom was up to something because he had been calling his former employees and coworkers back at the shop. And I kind of got word that he was sort of saying sorry for them. This is this rough guy, Vietnam vet, apologizing and essentially asking his former employees, colleagues to forgive him for the way he treated me. He said, look, I really like you. And I just want to call him and say that. So I knew he'd been up to something. He says to me, I believe God has forgiven me for all the ways I've messed up in my life. And however many weeks or days he gives me, my job is to reconcile with those people. So was Tom going through a deathbed conversion? Without a doubt. There's no doubt in my mind that he was going through a deathbed conversion. So at the end of that conversation, I do offer, because it's very appropriate, to have a word of prayer. He says, absolutely. We all join hands. We pray. Again, this is new territory for the HR guy. So we say our farewells. 2 weeks later, at the end of that prayer time, remember, this is the guy that did not have the time of day for me for 6 months, okay? After that prayer, he says to his current wife, if you've not already picked out somebody to officiate at my funeral, I would like Chaplain Steve to do that. And then hear these words, John. His next words were, because he knows my heart. Okay? I mean, that is the sweet spot for workplace chaplains, okay? To be able to hear those words from somebody like Tom, okay? Fast forward 2 weeks, he passes. We have a memorial service in a funeral home, military honors, because he's Vietnam vet. And I was able to talk with his family about the importance of being reconciled. And that's what Tom was doing. That is his legacy to all of you. So, I look at that and I go, that's why we do what we do. That's why we show up for 6 months at 5:30 in the morning, and we try and have conversations. And in some cases, people keep us at bay. So one other quick story, John, and then I know we need to wrap it up. I was privileged to serve actually the same couple. Their wife, I'll call her Kelly, worked at one company, and Josh, call him Josh, he worked at another company. That I happened to serve both companies. And for about the first year, I hear the same thing from both of them. They were both unhappy about their marriage. They carped on the other one. Josh would say, Kelly just wants to spend her time down on State Street, which, as you know, is full of bars, and she's a married woman with 2 young kids, and she swore nothing bad was happening, etc. And Kelly would have the same kind of things to say about her husband, Jay. So the pain level was not high enough to do anything about it. That went on. Then one day, everything changed. And remember the principle, be patient and be faithful, wait to be invited in, okay? So Kelly had a customer service job. And I should tell you, by the way, the company that she worked for is owned by Christians. It has Christian values in its purpose statement, okay? That in an ideal world, everybody lives up to. Well, there was one team that Kelly happened to be a part of that was not living up to the company values. The level of swearing was off the charts. Interestingly enough, the treatment of women and the telling of off-color jokes was significant in this team, okay? And again, the company has Christian values about conduct. And the worst offender was the one woman on this team, Kelly. So one day, about a year in, she says, so Chaplain, do you think that somebody could find a personal guru? Whoa, the conversation has just gone very significant. I know that she's not asking, in the true Hindu guru thinking. She's asking, is there such a thing as a spiritual guide for me? So we get permission to have the conversation offline. Quickly determined that she's asking some very deep spiritual questions. So I said, Kelly, I'm going to describe 3 people, and I want you to tell me who you would like to meet with. For a variety of reasons, it's not going to be me, okay? It needs to be a more mature woman. And so I describe a counselor, I describe a spiritual director, and then I describe somebody whose first name is Edna. The only way to describe her is that she does spiritual warfare, okay? She does almost like Old Testament prophet kinds of work, okay? Kelly says, without a doubt, I would like to see Edna. So I'll call Edna up. I say, would you be willing? She thinks about it, prays about it, comes back and says, okay, I will meet with Kelly. Kelly has no idea what she's in for because she is going to have an encounter with the living God. So they start meeting weekly, Kelly and her her mentor, her spiritual guru, if you will. And they meet together for 2 or 3 hours a week. And Edna has her reading scripture. The transformation is almost immediate. Okay. She then becomes a follower of Jesus, turns her life over to Christ. And 6 weeks in, by the way, with the conversation with the HR manager about this team, I said to the HR manager, do you see this inconsistency in this team, the treatment of women and the level of swearing as being inconsistent with the company values? And he said, actually, no, I don't. A couple of weeks later, he said, yes, I do. I see it. We did some brainstorming, okay, together, the two of us, the chaplain and the HR guy. What could we do about this? And this is so lame, John. The best thing that we came up with was like a swearing jar. If somebody let one rip, they'd put a quarter in a jar, and at the end of the week, we'd order pizza. I said, come on, that is so lame. So we didn't come up with a solution, okay? And I think God had other things in mind. So along comes Kelly. She has raises this great question, starts meeting with Edna. 6 weeks later, Kelly says to me, my eyes have really been opened. She said, and we had not talked about this at all. She said, my eyes have really been opened. She said, the level of swearing within this team is completely unacceptable. And the level of the way people are treating women is not good. It's degrading. That has to stop. And she says, I believe it's my task from God to help turn this around. So, back to your question, John, transformation. Here you got 2 stories where lives are transformed. The second story was Kelly. And by the way, her marriage improved as well. Here you have an example where there's a dramatic transformation of an individual or individuals and a whole team. And that's the area where we as workplace chaplains have just an incredible privilege to play a small part.
Steve, thank you so much. This has been a really enlightening conversation. We will put contact information for you in the show notes. And just thank you for the amazing work you're doing through corporate chaplaincy in the workplace.
Well, John, thank you for having me. And it's been a joy and a privilege.
Well, I'm grateful for you.